Hello, this is Carol Rosinski, and I made this video for my website toadhollowstudio.com. This video plays at 8 times normal speed. I used an HB pencil for the entire drawing, and I drew on Canson's pure white drawing paper. The 3 pears I'm going to draw are on the screen now. First, I measured the pears by using my pencil and thumb, and then I drew a rectangle from those measurements that you probably can't see here. Then I drew the edges of the pears that touched the rectangle first because they were easier to draw. I drew these lines very lightly. And soon I'm going to switch to an overhand grip and draw the lines more darkly and with more detail. I always work my drawings in steps that go from general to more precise. That's true with line drawing and also with the hatching, which you'll shortly see. I work like this to make sure I have the basic proportions right before I add details, and that saves headaches later on. And here's the first hatching. I usually make my first hatch a mid-range value, somewhere between the darkest dark and the lightest light on the subject. That gives me a lot of wiggle room. I can add shadows and I can subtract highlights. I'm starting to shape the dark shadows on the bodies of the pears, and I'm also making the edges of the pears look hard or sharp or distinct. As I mentioned, I start with a mid-value hatch, and that allows me to push back into space by adding shadows and pull the shape forward by erasing highlights. If you'll notice my chin in the upper right-hand corner, you can see how often I look from my drawing to the subject. And that's so I can compare reality to my drawing and make corrections as I go. But please remember, this is playing at 8 times normal speed. I always keep drawing though, no matter where my eyes are. This feels very natural after you've drawn for a while. Now I'm placing the cast shadows. Cast shadows don't have to be drawn perfectly to work, but they are usually a little darker near the object. And if you can capture that value difference, it makes the shadows look a little bit more realistic. Cast shadows give a feeling of weight to a drawing. These shadows are going to make these pears look like they're sitting on something. Now I'm sharpening that outside edge of that pear a little bit more. That's called a hard line. If you want an example of a soft line, take a look at the shadows on the bodies of the pears. See how their edges are graduated and soft looking? Those are soft edges. Now I'm adding a little bit more detail to that cast shadow. Here I'm adding shadow to the pear that's behind the other two. See how this pushes the pear farther back into space, and it also gives the shape a little bit more form. This always feels like sculpting to me. I'm shaping the form by giving it shadow. And as I work, I constantly compare it to the pears. Hatching in shadow is a very relative thing. You lay in a hatch, and then you compare it to the subject. And you keep correcting as you go. The first hatch you lay in, the first shadows, the first highlights won't be right. You have to lay down something though, and then compare it to reality and correct it, work back and forth, back and forth. Now I'm using a writing grip to draw in those stems. That's a more precise grip. I'm using my kneaded eraser to pull out some highlights. When the eraser goes off screen, I'm pinching the tip into a clean point. Now I'm reshaping those highlights. This is my electric eraser, and I'm using it to erase the brightest and smallest highlights. Even with a very precise eraser like this one, the highlights turn out the wrong shape, and usually their edges are too hard, so I always go back in with a sharp pencil tip and reshape them. And now this is done. I've created several drawing lessons that you can take online. Just click on the classroom link at toadhollowstudio.com to find out more about them.